probably doing some of these things. You're probably doing some of these things already, but hopefully I might give you some more thoughts and ideas to think about going forward. I'm just wondering how many are on here. Do you know, Leanne, is there?
We've got about half a dozen at the moment.
Okay.
We might pop in and yeah.
Terrific. And if I want to share my screen, yep, here we go. Oh, where's it gone? It's disappeared. I'll have to open it up again. I'm so, honestly, we're not doing too well, are we, today? No, that's not there. Okay, excuse me while I just go into my documents. There we go. There we go. So if I share my screen now, that should work. What's going on? There we go. So there we go. Okay, we're in business. And yes, as was mentioned, I have some personal experience that I bring to this, but also having talked to many siblings themselves as children and adults, many parents, many professionals. I wear a number of hats, I guess, because I bring the input of those others as well to this. And after 24 years, I set up Siblings Australia in 1999. Again, just hearing different stories. So hopefully I can encapsulate in just a short period of time some of the things that I have learned. Just a little bit about language. I understand that some of you will have children who have a condition that includes some sort of disability, some it'll be more of a medical condition. I'm going to use the term disability most of the time just because it's easier to just stick with one terminology, but I totally understand that for some of you, that may not be an entirely accurate description, and I apologise for that. The other thing that I want to mention is that the disability or illness of your child is only one factor in how your family manages this, how your family connects together, communicates, how you can become stronger and all of those sorts of things, that there are many factors that will influence that. So the key points that I want to make is that siblings are important for two reasons. They're important for their own well-being, but they're also important because of what they can contribute to the child with disability. And we know through various research processes that siblings have a huge role to play in anyone's identity development, physical development, all of those sorts of things. And so they're able to play a huge role, especially in those situations where a child is ill or has a disability. And so that relationship is a key lifetime relationship. And I know that some of you will be managing situations where there will be, shortened lifespan and all of those sorts of things. And I'm very mindful of those things. But I think in thinking about the relationship, it is really important. And we often talk about siblings in terms of a carer role, whereas I think that it's the relationship that is the most important thing. We know that siblings can face a number of challenges, and I'll talk about some of those in a minute, but it's relatively easy to give them the support that they need. And if we can support siblings, it benefits the whole family. It benefits parents, it benefits the child with the condition, but certainly the sibling. Now, certainly siblings can take some real opportunities from being a sibling. Certainly they understand the differences and diversity, that we're not all the same. They often develop a lot of compassion and empathy, and they usually care deeply about their brother or sister who might be going through their challenges. often they experience unconditional love from the person that's going through this, and they give that as well. Sometimes they develop a lot of maturity. That can be a good thing, but it can also be a downside. And I'll talk more about how we make sure that that doesn't develop into a situation that can be negative for the child. And often from their experiences in childhood, they can develop a range of skills that will take them into a career in the area of health or medicine or disability. So they can take some positive things through these experiences. But in terms of challenges, there can be a range of things that they experience. And certainly for young children, it's a lack of information. There can be confusion. One little girl thought that her brother's seizure was caused by playing with her hat under the dinner table. It was the first time he'd had a seizure. And so she thought, hat seizure, it must have been that. And so she didn't let him play with her things again. And as adults, we think, well, that's ridiculous. How could she think that? But to a young child, who often children want to make sense of what's happening around them, if they don't have the facts, they make up what might be happening. And that can lead to more worry and distress. There can be identity issues. And, you know, I think sometimes siblings are dismissed in a way, their challenges, in the sense of, oh, they just want more attention. But that attention is very fundamental to a child's development. And if a child is living next to a peer, their brother or sister of a similar age, but that child is getting so much more attention, it can really affect how they feel in terms of their own self-worth and their own, well, who am I? And it's not just the attention that they get from parents, but it's all of the attention that they get from others. And you know that going to hospital or going for medical appointments or whatever is not that exciting, but to them, it's the idea that the child is spending time with you, or they're getting special treatment somewhere. And so as a child, there can be real attractions. I remember I ran a sibling group many years ago, and one of the fathers was talking to me, and he mentioned that his daughter was so excited about having her tonsils out because her brother was always going to hospital. And so she was very excited about this. She wasn't so excited once she'd had them out, mind you, but there can be real attractions. There can be isolation. They feel that they can't talk to parents maybe because they don't want to add to your stress. Other kids, other family members might not understand. So they can feel quite isolated. Adults usually have other people that they can easily talk to, but sometimes children don't have that possibility. And there can be real, you know, big feelings that they're grappling with. Things like grief, worry about their brother or sister, grief for you as parents, grief for themselves, maybe sometimes that they don't have a brother or sister who does the same things and is able to do the same things with them as other kids they know and their brothers and sisters. There can be that guilt, that sort of survivor guilt of, you know, why did my brother or sister get this? Why not me? Maybe anger at different times. Things might need to get cancelled because of the needs of the child. You know, it might seem unfair to children that their brother or sister doesn't have to do the same chores that they do, or there are other seeming inequalities that they don't understand. And there can be fear too for a young child. They might fear, as the little girl I mentioned before, that they caused the illness or disability, or that they might catch it. Again, if they don't have correct information, they'll make up things. And then some of those feelings, they might sometimes feel like they just wish their brother or sister would disappear because they've just caused all this stress. And that can cause extreme guilt in a child, and real shame about those feelings, which are fairly natural feelings. I mean, all brothers and sisters love and hate each other from time to time. And I'm sure if you've got brothers and sisters, I'm sure you remember a time where you wish that they would just disappear. But in this situation where you've got someone next to you who might be suffering, who might be very vulnerable, it can create a lot of guilt if you have some of those very normal feelings. Sometimes there's extra responsibility, And sometimes that can be a really good thing for siblings. And I'll talk later about how we might keep that in balance. But generally, there is often a lot of family stress, and you can't take that away, but you can really support siblings to have a role in that and to know how to manage some of those things. There can be a pressure to achieve sometimes, to make up maybe for things that the brother or sister isn't able to do, to not make waves, to be the good child. Certainly that was me when I was younger. I was the good child. I didn't want to add to the stress of my parents. And in some ways that can be a good thing, but it can also lead to a situation where that perfectionism, that not wanting to make waves, can really impact adult relationships and the way that we go forward as adults. And then there's others' reactions, and depending on what sort of condition your child has, there may be things that are embarrassing, maybe their behaviour or the way they look. But there's always people who are going to be making comments or staring if that's the case. And little children, again, have trouble managing some of those reactions from other people. And as they become a little bit more aware, a little bit older, they might have concerns about the future and the future care of their brother or sister, and what might happen if you weren't around as parents. So not all siblings will experience all of these things. You might be able to, relate to some of these things in your children. You might not. You might be able to reflect and think, well, yes, maybe my child has experienced some of these things. And siblings, children in general, don't often tell you how they're feeling, but it can often show up in their behaviour. So, they might withdraw if they're very young. They might become very clingy or regress maybe to needing wearing nappies again or whatever, or they might withdraw to their bedroom a lot more than they used to, acting up maybe to get attention. And that can be difficult because it makes things more difficult for you as parents, but it may be that they're, really trying to get attention. And most kids prefer to get any attention, even if it's bad attention, than no attention at all. I mentioned the good child, people pleasing, perfectionism, overachieving, and that's great. But if it's not in check, then it can go further to then cause anxiety, depression, and low self-worth. Sometimes siblings will develop their own aches and pains, and they're pretty normal for all children. And so just because they're having extra tummy aches or complaining about other things, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily related to the illness of the brother or sister, but it's something to think about in terms of whether this might be anxiety. And sleep problems sometimes, and school social difficulties. And if a child is getting on well at school, if their routine is able to be maintained and they have their same social connections with friends and extended family, then they're likely to do okay. So these are just some of the signs to look out for when you're thinking about siblings. A couple of things that siblings have said. Again, a younger sibling talking about how she felt completely isolated. She couldn't share part of that part of her life with her friends. And then the second one is where three sisters in their 40s were talking about the fact they had a brother and a sister with severe disability and illness. And they reflected on the fact that none of them had ever had support. No one had ever asked them if they needed support. And they all had depression. And so again, the earlier we can start that support for siblings in your family's journey with this illness, the better. They're going to be stronger, and your whole family is likely to be stronger. So I'm going to go into these in more detail, but just in terms of sibling needs, they need open communication within the family, and that involves things like information, permission. I'll talk about that a little bit more, but to also feel special themselves. And then strong connections with family and friends. They need strong connections with family and friends, helps them feel valued themselves. It helps to create more positive meanings. And that can also hopefully assist with the relationship with the child with the condition. And I'll talk more about that. And then there's outside sources of support outside your immediate family and friends. And that might be through school or community programs where they might learn skills, coping strategies, learn how to ask for help, but develop some of those skills to manage. Connections with other siblings can be hugely important. I'm sure as parents, you value those times when you can talk to other parents who are going through something similar. And you probably share things with those parents that you wouldn't share with other friends or family who don't have the same experience as you. There's that understanding and knowing, and siblings who come to our programs over the years, have said things like, you just feel it there. And I'm sure you can relate to that. And then sometimes they might need help in terms of if this is an ongoing condition, they might need to be, as they move into their teen years, they might think about independence and their own identity and those sorts of things. Okay, so if we think about, I'm going through this reasonably quickly because I'd really like to make sure that we've got plenty of time for questions at the end. Thinking about what role you can play and, giving information and involving siblings in discussions is so important for them to feel that they're an important part of the family. And if you can't provide that information to them, there might be professionals that you're working with who might be able to fill that in. And, it doesn't need to be a long, detailed explanation, but probably in the sense of what the impact of this is on their brother or sister. They don't need genetic explanations if they're very young, but focusing on what the impacts, what does this mean, and what does it mean for your family? And listening to what they say, walking in their shoes in a way. I talked before about the little girl who was excited about having her tonsils out. Another parent talked about how her little girl said, I wish I was deaf. And I think as adults, we think, well, and this mother actually said to the child, that's a terrible thing to say. Don't ever say that again. But if only she'd been able to acknowledge that and say to her little girl, well, yes, sweetie, I understand there are attractions with being deaf, aren't there? They seem, your brother gets more presents. People ask after him all the time. I know you don't really want to be deaf, but recognizing too that maybe this little child wants a bit more attention, that the child who's deaf is getting a lot more attention. And so, maybe recognizing that and saying, do you need a bit more mummy time? Shall we go out early? Shall I pick you up early from school and we can go and have a milkshake, or something that shows them that you understand. And if they say things like, I'm so sick of all of this, or I'm sick of my brother, or whatever, to not immediately shut that down, but just help them open up and explore that a little bit and talk about the situation. It's really the situation that they're responding to. We talked about some of those behaviours that indicate stress, so thinking about those and being mindful. The next one is probably one of the most important ones, that permission to express their thoughts and feelings. And it's related to what I said before about being able to express things without fear that they're going to upset you, without fear of feeling guilty. Often these children are given messages like, oh, you're the lucky one, and that they shouldn't complain because think about their poor brother or sister or what they're going through. And all children, even if they're quite healthy, deserve to be able to complain from time to time. But permission is such an important thing. And whilst this story is related to a young girl who had an older sister with intellectual disability, the message is the same. And this mother of this young person, who was about 15, kept asking, she seemed quite down, and she kept asking her, you don't seem happy, what's happening? And she would just always say, no, nothing. And fortunately, the mother didn't give up, but she went out for coffee with her one day and again said, what's happening? You don't seem very happy. And again, this teenager said to her mum, no, nothing. Now, the mother again didn't give up, and they went out again a bit sometime later. And this time the mother said to her daughter, it must be hard being the sister to Susie at times. At which point this girl burst into tears and it all came out. Now, what had that mother given her? It had been permission to express those feelings. Now, what if her being down and quiet had nothing to do with her sister's disability at all? It was all about the fact that maybe her best friend had been asked out by the guy that she liked. You know, it was totally unrelated. Would it matter? No, it wouldn't matter at all. You are still telling this child that you understand that it's hard for them too. And in talking with adult siblings, they, you know, one of the big things they often bring up is that they just wish that their parents had been able to recognise and acknowledge that it was hard for them too. And sharing in that can be a very empowering thing. Another situation where a mother of two young girls and a baby, one of the older girls, they were about 7 or 8 at the time, one of those sisters had Dravet syndrome, which included epilepsy, and they were at the supermarket one day, all 3 children, including the baby, in the trolley full of groceries, and the child has a seizure. And, you know, you can imagine the kerfuffle. And anyway, they got back into the car after all of this carry on. And you can imagine this little girl sitting in the back seat thinking, oh, I better not say anything, mum's upset. Whereas the mum turned to her and said, well, that was the pits, wasn't it? And they were able to share then in some of the difficulty of that situation and could laugh about some of it. You know, oh, how was that older man? He was so helpful. He came and did that and he did that. And, oh, but how was that young mother who just stopped and stared? Or, you know, whatever the situation was, they could have a bit of a laugh about it. But the main thing was that they had empowered each other in a way. They knew they were there for each other. And if it happened again, they might just look at each other and share that sense of, oh, here we go again, but, you know, we'll be okay. We can manage this. And so sharing that understanding that, you know, that you are not going to think they're a bad person, or you're not going to judge them if they have, you know, they need to learn that whatever feeling they have is okay. They need to also know that not every behaviour is okay. So that they might feel angry, but they can't go around the house slamming doors, or they can't hit their sister, or they can't do whatever it is that you have in your family as rules. But they need to know that any feeling is okay. They're not a bad kid for having them. They're very natural feelings that they might be having. Spending one-on-one time, and that's tricky, I know, when you've got so many different commitments and different needs within your family, and there's a child with additional needs, it can be very difficult. But if there are chances to just, it doesn't have to be a long time even, but if there are chances for you to spend some time either at the end of the day, or like I said, if they're younger, you could pick them up from school early, take them out at lunchtime, those sorts of things. But trying to find other people who might be able to help you with that, to take your place in some situations. Valuing their help, but avoiding too much responsibility. I said that some responsibility can be really good for children, but we need to make sure it's not overdone. So it's about valuing their help and saying things like, thank you, that's so helpful for your brother and for me. Thank you for doing that. But no, this is mum's job now. You can go and play. Or no, dad's going to take over now. You can go and finish your homework, or whatever it is, creating that notion that they don't have to take full responsibility here. They're the sibling, you're the parent. And so you value their help, and, you know, they should be expected to help. But the key question is, can they meet their own needs by still providing support to other members of the family, that they're still able to have their own needs met. They're able to go out with friends. They're able to do the same things and keep some of those routines. Now, some of them may have to change, but I think if you can make an effort that some of those will stay the same. And then helping them learn coping skills. We all have different ways that we manage stress. Some people like to do something physical, punching a pillow or throwing hoops or going for a run. Other people like to journal or listen to relaxing music. So think about the sorts of things that help you and maybe share some of those with your children. I think too that sometimes as parents, we don't want to share our own feelings with our children, especially if we're upset. We're scared that they might think we're going to fall apart and disappear on them. But I think we can use them as teaching opportunities. For example, you might feel a little bit teary one day, and instead of trying to shut that down or hide it from your children, you know, it might be that you just say, yes, well, you know, I'm just a little bit teary this morning. I just feel really sad that this has happened or whatever. And then talk about what you're going to do to manage that. You know, it might be, but I'm going to talk to the doctors again, and I'm sure they'll be able to help with that. Or, yeah, why don't we go and see grandma later? That always makes us feel better. So that they start to learn that they can do something to manage some of these feelings and get help from outside, but also draw on their own self-care, self-soothing to be able to manage some of those things. Learning coping skills in terms of other people's reactions and thinking about how they might respond. You might go through with them different responses that they might have. Encouraging their own interests, as I said before, trying to keep some of those routines. And I know that can be difficult, but even if just some of them can be maintained. And if there's opportunities to connect with other siblings, we have a program called SibWorks, which is a peer support program for children who are 8 to 12 years of age. That's focused on disability. It can easily be adapted to other situations. But, you know, if you organisations, we've done a revamp of that program, and we've got online training now, and we're hoping that lots of people around the country will pick that up. But even informally, if they can get together with other siblings, if you make friends who might have children as well with some sort of condition, that you might be able to get together for informal play dates and things like that, picnics. But also different organisations might have other activities for siblings to be able to come together. And then if they are concerned about, you know, the future care of their brother or sister and what that might involve, it can be helpful to talk about that. I'm just going to have a quick look. Okay, so they're just questions. So let me come back to those when we've finished. We're nearly done, and then I'll definitely come back to those questions. Thank you for those. So just very briefly, in terms of Siblings Australia, our mission statement is that, you know, siblings are acknowledged, they're connected to support, and that through that they become more resilient. And as I mentioned, SibWorks, but there's also an e-learning program for parents and professionals. I run one-on-one parent sessions if parents want to dig a little bit deeper. And we've got a website that's got a lot of information. And like I said, the terminology on that website is around disability, but it's very open. The things that we talk about are really relevant to any sort of disability or illness. Okay, so I might leave it at that. I'll stop screen sharing.
Thanks.
And then if we go back, I'm not sure, how do I get rid of that resume sharing? Let's see if I can end this. And show. And I delete that. Rotate here. Oops. Now, where's the Zoom call?
You've got four questions there, Kate. You happy to navigate through them? Would you like me to read them for you?
That's okay. I'll read them.
Okay.
Okay, so Okay, so if children have an NDIS plan, the best way of trying, I know people have been able to, but the best way of having success with that is to make sure that the goal for the child who is on the NDIS is related to their relationship with their brother or sister. So that might be something like, I want to improve my relationship with my brother or sister. I want my brothers or sister to understand my disability more. There might be a number of different ways, but the goal has to be in terms of that child. And certainly in the early years, people are starting to understand that that's important. I mean, it's very sad in a way that there's no specific support item that relates to siblings. There's one called parent carer training, but nothing to do with siblings. It's much easier if you are self-managed because you can claim it through capacity building. And if you focus on that relationship, relationships are a key theme of the NDIS. And so there should be more attention given to those relationships, regardless of any caregiving role that the sibling may or may not play. I actually have some real concerns about calling siblings young carers, which I can go through if you're interested. But yeah, so if you have trouble, I'm more than happy for people to contact us to really fine tune that. But yes, you can certainly try, and I certainly have heard of people. Part of the difficulty with NDIS is it depends on who the planner is, and if you're within ECEI, who the practitioners are, but certainly happy for you to come back if you have trouble. So I think in terms of practical examples of coping skills, they're sort of related to a number of different things. For example, if it's anxiety, if there's a lot of stress, then it's very similar to the sorts of coping skills we might use with parents. And that might be, like I said, doing something soothing or something that's active. I mean, children respond a lot of times to active things. It might be that they throw basketball hoops, or you might put on loud music and they dance. I mean, kids getting rid of tension with activity is a really good way of, shaking out the stress that they might be feeling. So some of that is internal, maybe even, I know that schools do quite a little bit of mindfulness training with children. So maybe some of those things. But then the other sorts of coping skills are those which mean maybe reaching out to ask for help. And that is quite a skill that people need to develop. And so letting them know that they can reach out to you, or you might have grandparents or a special aunt or uncle who might be able to be a bit of a listening ear to them, that they can go and debrief with when perhaps they don't feel like they can do that with you because you've got enough on your plate. And the main thing is to let those adults in their life understand that they need to be able to vent. And yes, they're lucky they don't have the condition that their brother or sister has, but to be open to what they're saying and listen and acknowledge it. The last thing a sibling needs when somebody, if a child reaches out and, says that they're having real difficulty, or they're really, sick of mum having to go to the hospital or whatever it is, the last thing they need is for somebody to say to them, oh, come on, at least you don't have to be in hospital, or, come on, you're the well one, you've got to be the strong one. We can't expect that of young children. So it's around acknowledging it and then moving it to something positive. That reminds me of a little story from my own experience where my sister was quite strong in spite of her disabilities, and she would often hit me and I would hit her back. And I was probably 7 or 8. She was older than me. And my mother would always say, don't do that. She can't help it. Now, that was like a red rag to a wounded bull. As far as I was concerned, she could help it. But in that moment, I felt like my mum didn't care that I was hit. All she cared about was that my sister was. Now, my mum adored me, but if only she'd been able to say something like, I'm sorry she hits you. I wish that didn't happen. But, you know, she doesn't quite understand, and that's her way of coping with this. What else could you do in that situation? You know, let's think about when she hits you again, what would be something else that you could do? And so I would have felt much more cared about if I'd heard that first bit. I also would have listened to that second bit with much more openness if I'd had my own needs acknowledged. And I know it's very tempting and it's easy when you're stressed to just say, oh, for goodness sakes, you know, you're the one that's healthy, you know, buck up or whatever. And remember too that children are quite forgiving. So you can always go back and say, look, I'm sorry, I yelled at you and said that. I know it's hard for you too. I was just really stressed. But yeah, they can often be very forgiving. So should parents make sure that they do set aside special time with each sibling each week? We realise it's easier said than done. Yes, I think it is important, and it doesn't have to be a long time. I mean, it might even be that you're in the car on your own with the sibling, taking them somewhere, or, you know, there are just finding that time and, you know, not making them feel, you know, totally obliged or whatever, but just letting them know that they're important. You know, I realise I've had to spend a lot of time in the hospital this week, but I'm going to make sure that this person, you know, goes in on Saturday afternoon and we're going to do something together, and then we'll go into the hospital together. Or, you know, I'm going to pick you up from school early. And it doesn't even have to be every week. It's what works in with your family. But I think it is as important that you are doing that as well as meeting the medical needs for the child with disability. And I know that's difficult, but like I said, it doesn't have to be long periods of time, but it does have to be regular. And so that that child feels that they are important to you as well. Now, definitely in terms of school, I would really talk to your teacher every year about the sibling and what's going on in their family. And each of you will have very different experiences. I mean, some siblings might not be able to finish their homework. Some might be tired because they're up at night. Others might be experiencing difficulty at school because of other people's reactions. There might be a range of things. And so it's really important to just talk to the teacher about that so that the teacher can understand that. And, you know, if their brother or sister is at the same school, then, you know, I think that's important as well to just say, well, yes, the sibling has needs as well. And I don't know if any of you, excuse me, have experienced this, but I've heard from some parents that, and more so where there's a disability rather than illness, but where there's a child in the classroom who might need extra support, they'll sometimes go to a sibling, a child they know is a sibling, and say, oh, can you support this child? And that shouldn't be something that siblings are, you know, singled out for. If the whole classroom takes it in turns to support this child in the classroom, then fine, but not if this sibling is identified as someone who can do that. It just needs to be in balance again, that responsibility at school and at home as well. Now, when I've answered these questions, I'm going to open it up again if anyone wants me to talk further about something or has another question in response, because we have got some time. But yeah, certainly talking to teachers is really important. And if you are at a school that maybe has a school counsellor or a psychologist, they might even think about running a SibWorks program, because again, that would be wonderful to include other children in that school who are also siblings. And look, the disability, the illness might be very different amongst siblings, but what siblings need is pretty much the same. And so you could have a child that had a brother or sister with cancer, you could have someone with a brother or sister with autism. And while some of the sort of intricate details might be different, and there might be some differences in how the sibling could be supported, mostly their needs are pretty similar. Now, I've had trouble getting my NDIS sorted. So in terms of the sibling support, or I'm not sure if you mean NDIS generally, we can't help with helping you with the NDIS generally, but if you needed some help with maybe thinking about how those goals might be interpreted for the child, for the sibling, then certainly. And if you want to follow up with that, you can email us on info@siblingsaustralia.org.au. Maybe Meredith can share that in the chat box. Now, this is a tricky one. How much of the child's condition should be told to their sibling? Look, it depends on so many different things. It depends on the child's age. It depends on, the prognosis for the condition. I think, again, the important thing is to let children know what this means, what's the impact on the child. When it comes to talking to them about if this is a life-limiting condition, those sorts of things, then I think that the services that you're accessing, whether that's through palliative care, whether it's through, a unit at a hospital, there should be people there who can help you with that and share age-appropriate information. I always think that children need information, or they make up things. They tend to worry more if they don't know what's going on, if they don't understand. But there's also a limit in terms of what you say to a child and their age and the circumstances. So it's really hard for me to say how much you should tell. I mean, there are some situations where even if a child has a very limited lifespan, that's still something that could be shared with the sibling, but it needs to be done in a fairly controlled sort of way where there is support around that. And so, like I said, hopefully, if that's the case, you've got access to, psychologists, social workers, palliative care workers, whoever they might be. But look, if it's a situation where they've got a genetic condition, their lifespan is not affected, but or not certainly in the short term, then it is important to let them know as much as you can about that condition. And again, you might use professionals to explain some of those things that you might not know completely, but certainly professionals should be able to help with that. There's also books that can help. And, I think there are resources out there that can help with that. But certainly in that situation, it needs to be the people that are working with you as a family to manage that. There's not one answer that fits all. So any other questions? Thank you to the parent who asked a question. I'm sorry I wasn't able to answer that clearly, but with the information I had, it's a little bit hard to. But yeah, please don't go away from this session thinking, oh, I wish I'd asked that. Please think about asking a question. We've still got some time. And no, everybody's quiet. No question.
Thanks so much, Kate. I think you've covered quite a lot for us, and it was a really informative session. I've been watching the questions come through as well, and I think we've covered all of them. I have popped in the Siblings Australia email address in the chat, so if anyone wants to reach out directly, I'm sure they'll reach out to you and your team. If there's nothing else to cover off, we might wrap up there.
And sorry, I rushed through it a little bit, but I wanted to make sure we had plenty of time for questions. And yes, hopefully it wasn't too rushed.
Oh, it was great.
And I will mention too that, I mentioned my book earlier that parents have found useful. And again, whilst it's the terminology is disability, there is some information in there too about bereaved siblings and, those sorts of things as well. And I would ask, and Leanne is going to send you through an evaluation sheet, and I know they're pains to fill in, but for our reporting purposes, we need to be able to say, well, yes, this is what we've done and how this has been helpful to families. and how it might be improved as well. So if you can, it's only a very short, it's online, anonymous and very short. So please, we rely on you to just do that little thing for us.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Kate. And thanks everyone for participating today and sending through your questions. That does wrap up our October webinar. So thank you. Next month, we've got Dr. Andrew Elliston talking about the structure of NF1 and what it will mean for the NF community in the future. So that's planned for the 30th of November. So I hope people register for that. It'll be online shortly. Okay. Thanks, everyone. See you later. Bye.